What's up, John?
How you doing, Nick?
I'm fantastic. I won't lie, a little disappointed my whole life as a Leaf fan. I grew up and thought you were from Oakville, Ontario, and then you tell me yesterday you were there for like 2 years. Damn it.
Yeah, I was there for a quick stint when I was born. My dad's from Oakville, my mom's from Hamilton, so lived in Oakville for the first 2 years of my life, and then made the trek a little further south down to the Hammer.
Probably a smart play there, my man. I appreciate you coming on today. I know Leafs fans fired up to have you on. Were you familiar with the nickname Johnny Malkin, John?
You know what? So I think my dad had mentioned that to me at some point or something like that, and I, I'm aware of it. What that really means, I'm not sure. I don't know. I guess I'm a poor a poor man's Malkin. That was for sure.
Yeah, pretty much. You scored the filthiest goals and you worked your ass off. And right away, I think you became a fan favorite with the Leafs fan base. And pretty much they called you like an Evgeny Malkin light and named you Johnny Malkin because you scored the sickest goals and had like the sickest plays and never got the credit, you know?
Well, I guess that happens, right? Sometimes every once in a while you catch lightning in a bottle and you score some flashy goals, but I guess the consistency part of that, doing that all the time, was lacking there.
I love the modesty. And of course, now you're covering the Colorado Avalanche for Altitude TV. And what a team to cover. What an era to be covering the Colorado Avalanche. Well, what's it been like covering this team?
I mean, it's phenomenal. Every night you get to see obviously world class players with Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Kale McCarr. I mean, this guy's just silly. The things that he's able to do on the blue line and just rush the puck. He honestly looks like Bobby Orr back in the '70s. He's such a fluid skater. He's aware of what's going on the ice, and just the way Colorado plays offense in the offensive zone is. I think I said it last time I was on the broadcast. They're kind of revolutionizing how
Mhm.
teams play in the offensive zone just because of how much their D are involved. The days of D man, just hey, you are not allowed to go within 5 feet of the inside the offensive blue line. You got to stay back. I mean, for the Avalanche, those days are over because there are quite a few cases multiple times during the game where Colorado will have two defensemen within 5 feet of the front of the net, and they'll have two forwards up at the blue line, right? And it confuses defense, especially when defensive teams play zone, because D all of a sudden you've got two D in front of the net, and those two forwards have vacated the front of the net, and D and wingers are like, what's going on here? I don't know where to be, and that's where the Avalanche get a lot of their offense from. They get a lot of shots, just inside the blue line from forwards with D man in front of the net, assuming forward positions. So they're potent offensively, but just the way that they cycle the puck and they use their D man in their offense is special to watch.
What's the feeling around the Avalanche team right now? Obviously, we know how difficult it is to repeat. We know how banged up this team is. Gabe Landeskog hasn't played a game this season. Then you lose Arturi Lehkonen, makes his revenge return to the Bell Center, scores 2-1, then promptly leaves that game, breaks his finger. It just never seems like we'll be able to get like the full belief or feel of this Colorado team with everybody in that lineup, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. They've been banged up every game. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer to getting a player back. Boom, somebody else gets injured. Right? Like, and Lehkonen, he's a good player. He plays on the first line with McKinnon and Nichushkin. I think he's got close to 50 points. He's had a career year, and he's such a driver for that line because he's first in on the forecheck. He'll get the puck, he'll get it to Nate, and then his first thought is to get to the front of the net. Right? He plays a simple game, but it's very effective for what he does on that line. So losing someone like him it's obviously going to be difficult for their team, and I think they called up Galchenyuk, and I mean,
Hmm.
honestly, he didn't fare too well in the couple games that he got called up earlier. Mind you, I think he was coming off of injury and he hadn't played too many games down in the American Hockey League. So he's got a few more games under his belt. He's obviously played a lot of games in the NHL. Hopefully, he can kind of find his stride and give this team a little bit of a boost. He's not going to be an Arturi Lehkonen, but I'm
Hmm.
not even sure where he's going to be slotted in the lineup, to be quite honest.
From a Leafs perspective, I'm already preparing myself for the inevitable, like Dennis Malgin from Alex Galchenyuk goal. And you played in the league, man. It's like you always get up for games against your former teams, especially when like, you leave not on your terms. If that makes sense, you want to give it to them, man. Like there's a belief internally, isn't there, when you make a return to a team?
100%, without a doubt. I mean,
Yeah.
there's that little, you have a little bit more jam, you got a little bit more edge to your
Hmm.
game. And I mean, and a lot of times for, good players that are third, fourth line guys, you're not leaving on your terms. You're getting shipped out, whether you like it or not. So yeah, there's a little revenge aspect to that. And I mean, let's be honest, anytime you're coming into Toronto to play a game, whether you play for that team or not, that's an exciting place to play and be at. So yeah, you best believe that those two guys will be looking to get on the score sheet or impact, have a big impact in the game at some point.
You just know what's happening. So I'm happy you brought up our Terry Lekkinen. To me, this was like not like the steal of last year's deadline, but I just love the placement with that roster. And Joe Sakic, I think that was a very under the radar move. Like Ivan Barbashev is a guy with Vegas who I think can do the very same thing that Lekkinen did with Colorado. He's sort of a Swiss Army knife. So I ask you this: I know you're tied in with the Leafs perspective. You watch some of their games as well. Is there a player on that roster right now that you can identify and say, hey, he can bring a lot of what Lekkinen brought to Colorado last year?
Are you referring to like the Leafs roster?
Yeah, like a Kerfoot. Like we've talked about Kerfoot being that guy. Is there a couple guys on that roster that you look at that say, hey, they can elevate to play to that level?
Well, I mean, I obviously Ryan O'Reilly is a huge
Hmm.
component. Unfortunately, he breaks his finger, but I mean, he was playing really
Yeah.
well, and you'll have him for the playoffs, and he's a proven playoff stud. So we let's not even talk about him. But I think the sneaky undercover, really good piece that came with that trade was that
Mhm.
Achari guy. That guy is built for the playoffs, period, right? Because he's a banger. He gets in the corners, he'll muck it up, he'll get to the front of the net. He's more like Arturi Lehkonen than probably anybody else that the Leafs picked up at the deadline. And I love that trade. When I saw that they got Factor, I was like, oh, that's great. And then when I heard that they threw in Achari at the same time, I'm like, wow, that's a phenomenal trade to get both of those players because Toronto needs somebody like him in their lineup. Kerfoot, he's a good player, but at the same time, he's a smaller player. You need a big body. You need somebody that's willing to bang, get to the front of the net, muck it up, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like Noel Acciari is a great asset for that Toronto Maple Leafs team going into the playoffs.
Where do you stand in that conversation? Obviously, you saw it firsthand with Colorado last year. Like the Manson pickup was unbelievable. Like I think you need that grit factor, that pugnacity. Like to quote Brian Burke, like you need that sort of factor in the playoffs, or I think you run the risk of being bullied out of town. Like where do you stand in that conversation? Because as you know, we can talk all we want about Mitch Marner having an unbelievable year, Matthew scoring goals, but we know it's just going to be so tight come the Stanley Cup playoffs, right?
Well, yeah, I mean that whole conference, that Eastern Conference is I mean it's wild. The teams that you're going to have to go through just to make it to the Stanley Cup final is insane. So, us teams over here, the Avs and teams over in the West, East, go ahead, beat each other up. Just go 7 games and just have tons of bumps and bruises by the time you get there. And, hopefully again, the Avalanche are there. But yeah, it'll certainly be interesting, but you need that grit factor in the playoffs. I understand that the game is moving away from having, big burly dudes that, can only, crash and bang and they don't have a lot of skill or whatever. But at the end of the day, in the playoffs, you need to have a little bit of a bully on your team, some intimidation factor. It doesn't matter because you're playing that same team night in, night out, best of 7, right? So you can get in somebody's head. Guys are going to start hearing footsteps. D-man are going to be like, oh, this guy's right on my butt again. Like, here we go. He's just going to run me over. And I don't care who you are. You do not like getting run over time in, time out, game after game, game after game. That gets tiresome big time. So having those guys that are physical and able to get in there, get on the body, wear guys down, it's so important to have on your team.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, and certainly they'll need that in the first round here against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Not to compare Toronto and Colorado, but what do you think the Leafs can learn from Colorado's journey over, say, like the last decade here?
Well, I mean, let's think about this. The last time the Leafs made the playoffs, I was playing junior hockey and I was back home in
Holy,
Ontario living with my
yeah,
parents. So
shit.
it's been a long time, man, like a really, really long time. So I don't know. For the Leafs, I just they just have to get over that hump, right? They've been close. They've been seven, losing in game seven. You'd love them to not even get to game seven because obviously there's just demons floating around in whatever dressing room they're in, whether they're on the road or at home. So you'd like to see them not even get to that game seven. But for the Leafs, I just think it's important that they make some trades like they did. They've kind of pushed their chips all in, and so have some other
Hmm.
teams in the East, which is kind of crazy that many teams in the East are throwing a lot of chips in the pot there, and let's see what happens. But for the Leafs, I just think that yeah, they've made the right moves at the deadline. You know Kyle Dubas, he's done everything that I believe he can to solidify this team and make them a playoff team. Now it's on the players at this point. It's not the coaching staff, it's not the GM. Those guys have all done their job. The coaching staff, they've implemented whatever type of style that they want to play. Now it's 100% on the players to come up, show up, bring tenacity, bring that edge, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's sort of funny. I mean, from that perspective, there's not much more they can do, and now to push everything into the middle, as you said, I couldn't agree with that approach. Much more. The fact that this is incumbent on the players, like it's your time to shine, it's your time to get the job done. I was just curious to get like sort of the perception from like the Colorado point of view when it comes to the Leafs. As you know, back on New Year's Eve, what a way to ring out 2022 for Toronto. They pull out a 6-2 win. Bunting scores 2 goals in that game. What's the perception around Toronto, like out of market? I asked RA from Spit and Chicklets this when I had him on a couple months ago. Like, what's the perception? Do Bruins fans take the Leafs seriously? Like, do Avalanche fans like talk about the Leafs? Does anybody in that market care about the Leafs?
Uh, In all honesty, you don't hear too much about the Leafs here. I mean,
Yeah.
Colorado is they're a tight knit group. This fan base, they're there's not a team an hour flight away. Every team that you want to play is a 2 hour flight. So the Colorado fans, they're in their own little bubble and they stay here and they watch the Avs. Well, they try to watch the Avs faithfully. Comcast and
Mm-hmm.
Altitude and Cronky Sports, they're in their tiff for this is, I think they're on year three now where you can't watch games locally. So people have found other avenues to watch a game, but that's here nor there. So I don't believe that, like, the Avs fans, they're not looking at Toronto being like, oh, Toronto, they're this, they're that. They don't think about that. I mean, just because I believe it's because they're in the East and they're over there. They're kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
So we worry
Yeah.
about we worry about our teams over here, the Minnesota Wilds, the Vegases, the Winnipegs, the Dallases. Those are the teams that we worry about, and eventually in the playoffs, if it comes down to it, then I think this fan base will look at Toronto and be like, all right, let's see where they're at.
It's very true. Everything is built on the success in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and of course the Avalanche win last year. And you even look back, even pre-deadline, the conversation in the West was all about Colorado, all about Edmonton. But LA's been outstanding lately. I know Minnesota lost Kaprizov, but they've been really, really good as of late. The Dallas Stars, I think people are sleeping on that team as well. So it should be a lot of fun to see if the Colorado Avalanche can repeat. Just a couple more on your sort of playing days. Like, what did it mean to you as a local product to be a Toronto Maple Leaf? And is anything stick out from your time as a Maple Leaf that makes you laugh or makes you like just reminisce?
Well, yeah, I grew up obviously Oakville, Hamilton, so I grew up watching the Leafs. That was the only team I could watch. I don't believe there was any NHL package when I was growing up, and if there was, we certainly didn't have it or could afford it. So the only games I ever watched were the Maple Leafs, watching Dougie Gilmore, watching Wendell Clark at Maple Leaf Gardens. I went to one Maple Leaf game when I was a kid, sitting up in the nosebleeds at Maple Leaf Gardens and going to the bathroom and just I remember the troughs being in there and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So that was always a memory for whatever reason that I have because I was like, what are we peeing in here, Dad? But so I have those fond memories, and then obviously being drafted by them was very special, and that was a treat, and it was in Nashville, and I'll tell you a quick story. We were after
Yeah,
after the
please.
draft, each team has a suite, that obviously wraps around the rink. And so we went up to the suite, and Pat Quinn was up there, George Armstrong was up there. It was pretty cool. And my uncle Bob was there with my cousin, his son. And my uncle Bob, he was a huge Leafs fan. He grew up just outside of Toronto his whole life when he was young, and he would tell me stories how he would take all his players' cards and go down to Maple Leaf Gardens on Saturday mornings and get guys to sign them and whatnot. So when he was in the suite, he was obviously in heaven, and he got a picture with Pat Quinn beside him, George Armstrong, on the other side, and then my little Uncle Bob in between. I think the top of his head made it to their shoulders or whatever, and he actually had a good buddy that worked for the Toronto Sun, I believe. And so my
Hmm.
Uncle Bob was in a picture on the front page of the sports with those two guys. So he kind of cherishes that moment. So I was, it's pretty cool that I was able to have my uncle there for that. And then my parents were obviously there. And I think, what was it? Wayne Gretzky, he was there with Arizona, and he was a couple suites
Yeah.
down, and we're just sitting there, and all of a sudden my mom out of nowhere just starts yelling, Wayne, Wayne, Wayne. And I was like, what is she doing? And then sure enough, she's yelling at Wayne Gretzky, hey, can I get a picture? Can I get a picture? So I have a picture in my Maple Leafs jersey that I got obviously on draft day with Wayne Gretzky in the well,
Wow.
the Arizona Coyotes suite now. So I've got a cool picture with Wayne, and so just those little memories. And I played 3 years in the minors for the Marlies. I played their inaugural season there. So that was kind of fun to be a part of that. And I played 3 full years there, and I didn't know where my career was going to go. I never got called up once, so I was just like, ugh, like I was on the fence. Do I resign? Do I go to Europe or whatever? But I'm really happy that I stuck with it and I re-signed, and I was able to make the Leafs that next year. Had a decent NHL career after that. So, but just yeah, it was obviously a very special moment, and a special time for me to be able to play in Toronto and play for my hometown team that I grew up watching.